us, as you explained, this would also grow the government, which makes a lot of people crazy. And I have to tell you, even myself, I cringe at the thought of it, this overreaching organism that's already overstepping its boundaries. The devil's in the details. From the pharmaceutical medical system to the stuff that's dumped in our water supplies. And that's what makes me concerned. They dump fluoride, they dump all these chemicals, even antidepressants into our water supplies. These are government agencies. And so this scares me, and I'm sure I'm not the only one. I'm sure this makes some other people wince. What do you say to that?
Well, our government agencies are pretty much captured by, it's called regulatory capture. They're captured by the big corporations that they're supposedly regulating, that they've managed to change the laws to serve them rather. But if you had a government that, first of all, if it was self-funding, so it wasn't dependent on all this money. The reason money owns the government right now, big financiers own the government because that's the only place you can get the money. You have to go to private bankers and private corporations to get the money to fund your campaign so that you can even be a politician. But if the government were allowed to have what should be a natural public function of overseeing production of money, the political process could be funded publicly, and therefore they wouldn't be dependent on these big corporations. They could be independent of them. I mean, you would just have to redesign your whole system. Right now the system is corrupt, but it could be made. It should be a cooperative. It should be of the people, by the people, for the people. I'm here in Switzerland right now, and I'm going to Mondragon in Spain.
Beautiful.
On my way back, and that's a cooperative community. It's quite large. I don't remember how many. I mean, it's huge business now.
Mondragon is huge. Would you gather some pamphlets from there for me?
Sure.
I love what they've done. That is an incredible model. There's even a book on Mondragon.
Yeah, so that's the idea, that we're not talking about the government as them taking from us. The government is us. And if we could get back our government, we could have a government that serves us.
Do you think that having a state-run bank as a model, let's say one in California got done, I believe this is going to happen. Are you going to run that bank? Are you going to get involved more intimately to make sure this continues the way that you're seeing it? What's going to be your involvement?
I'm just a writer, and I do have a vision of how things should be, and right now I'm writing a book on public banking specifically. It's a sequel to Web of Debt. But I'm sort of recombining that same information that I had before, plus a lot of new information. But anyway, the reason I like to write is that it's all organic, and writing for me is a vehicle that allows me to actually see what's happening. I pull pieces together, and then I see there are other pieces missing, and then I see a larger picture and a larger. So really what I do is just write. but I think that there are a lot of people that are inspired to carry on with this project, and particularly it looks to me like we're heading for worse times, and when it's always when things fall apart that popular movements are formed and things change in a way that you would never expect them to be able to change so quickly.
I think your talk at Mondragon is going to be very, very interesting. Now, are you going to have that taped?
Oh, I'm not actually doing a presentation. I'm just interacting with the banking people. So,
well, get as much as you can from their model and have them give you some of their books, because their model is like none other I've ever heard of in the world. I think that even Dee Hock, who was the founder of Visa, talked about them in his book in terms of a cooperative model. And I mean, it lent itself to creating all of these jobs and all these different entities that do different things, these cooperative entities from food to everything. Do you see public banking in the United States being able to create a different credit criteria? With the number of people that have lost their houses, lost their cars, and lost their jobs, most people in America aren't going to be able to qualify to even get cars. So we may even need new credit criteria.
Well, that's what I think they should use quantitative easing for. the Federal Reserve should step up and start buying things in the real economy. They could buy up single family dwellings and relieve the glut, and they could buy them up and rent them back to the people that can't afford to own but need a place to live.
It's kind of scary. What do you think about our debt to China? How much debt we have to China, and how many notes China's holding of our U.S. dollars?
Well, I don't see that as a threat. I mean, they're holding them. They've got it. They can sell them if they want, and they haven't sold them. So what they want, they're holding our bonds and we're paying them interest. We'd be better off cashing them out, if you ask me. Say, all right, now you've got the bonds. We want the bonds back. You give us here's your dollars. Or in other words, when the bonds come due, we do cash them out. That's what we always do. But then we try to borrow the money to replace the bonds. In other words, we issue more bonds. But what the government should do is just pay off the bonds and then don't issue any more. Pay them off with dollars printed by the government. Call it quantitative easing if you want. And they'll go away. They'll now have $2 trillion in dollars instead of $2 trillion in bonds. And you might say, well, what if that money comes flooding into the system? It'll be inflationary, but it's not. If they had wanted to spend that money, they would have spent it. They could easily cash those bonds anytime they wanted to. The reason they don't is because they don't have anything they want to buy with it. They want us to buy their products.
What do you think about the fact that a lot of people are very afraid of the condition and value of the U.S. currency, the Federal Reserve dollars? What is your take on the status of the dollar?
The dollar is losing value. Trust me, I know. I'm here in Switzerland where the Swiss franc is, I mean, you can barely afford a cup of coffee here these days. But it's more a matter of perception. People think it's because of quantitative easing, but quantitative easing has not added to the money supply. That money is sitting on the books of the banks, the same place it was when it was bonds. Now it's sitting there as dollars. There's now $1.6 trillion in excess reserves sitting on the books of the banks, and they're not lending. So that money is not going anywhere. It's not going out into the economy and competing for goods and services and driving up the prices. The reason that gold and silver and oil and food are going up is that as people perceive the dollar is becoming weaker, they think there's going to be hyperinflation, and so they pull their money out of the dollar and they put them into assets that they perceive as being better bets. So the hot money is all, they're not going to go into real estate because that's collapsed. And so they've put the money into commodities, including food, which is driving up the cost of food this is critical for third world countries where maybe a third of their money goes for food. So when food goes up, they can't afford to eat. It's speculation that has caused this to go up. It's not actually because the money supply has been suddenly pumped up. In fact, we're still several $1 trillion short compared to where we were in.
Well, the Federal Reserve's not printing M3 anymore as of 2006. But if you get enough people that perceive that something is losing its value and they perceive a threat of loss, there's a fleeing from the currency. My question is this what the powers that be want? To no longer use it, so it becomes more unstable even, and nobody wants it. Instead of them ditching the U.S. dollar, they get all of us to ditch the dollar. That could create a collapse, couldn't it?
Right. No, I agree with you. I think that is part of the plot. If there's an agenda, that's part of the agenda, to bring down the dollar so that a global reserve currency can be substituted, which they plan to control, whoever they are.
If that were to happen, God forbid, if that were to happen, what do you think would be used? I know we talked about the IMF basket of currencies, and they have their own instrument that they use, but what do you think it's going to be? Do you think we're going to end up being in some type of electronic money that's tracked?
Yeah, I think that's the plan. Actually, there is not enough money in the system to cover principal and interest. I mean, as long as we have the system that we have, it has to continually grow. So it's not a bad idea to have a global release valve of that sort. But the problem is, who's going to control it? What the amorphous they want, is supposedly control by the IMF, which is, very manipulative.